Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sincerely with Sam Lewis. Still working on a few kinks and glitches, but we're going to get it right. Uh, so, welcoming you today on this episode, we're going to examine the recent election results in California to understand what voters prioritize and how we can continue pushing criminal justice reform in the current landscape. Two key criminal justice measures were on the ballot. Proposition 36, which passed and rolled back some successful policies, and Proposition 6, which failed, but would have removed slavery and involuntary servitude from California's Constitution. In addition to these, two leading progressive prosecutors, the Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon and Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price, were defeated. While in some instances it's tempting to see these results as a sign of a shift in California, that's actually not the case. To discuss this and much, much more, I'm pleased to bring two experts who can help us break down the 2024 election and where the movement goes from here. Bringing on Claire Simonich, who is an associate director at Vera, California, who is working alongside community organizations to lead the initiative's efforts against incarceration and towards the care in Los Angeles County. Claire, and then Christine Soto DeBerry is the founder and executive director of the Prosecutors Alliance. She spent a decade as the chief of staff to San Francisco District Attorney George Gascon and Chesa Bodine. Good morning. Good morning to you both. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, Sam. Good morning. I'm good. I'm enjoying the gloomy weather in LA. It feels nice.
It is gloomy today.
And I'm glad to be with both of you.
Christine, how are you doing today?
Good morning, buenos dias. I'm, picking myself up and dusting off and getting back in the fight. So ready for a little break and then time to get back to work.
That's right. The fight don't stop. And so if anybody thinks we're tapping out, sorry. We continue for the next round. First things first. What are your big takeaways from this election? Claire, and many in the media, many in the media have actually said the election result means criminal justice reform is over in California. Do you think that's the case?
Absolutely not. The results are disappointing across the board. They're disappointing here in California on some of the criminal justice measures that we're going to talk about today, Prop 36, Prop 6, the DA results. They're disappointing across the country. But the takeaway from these results is absolutely not that criminal justice reform is dead. And like Christine, I had to take some time off, brush myself off, rest, recover. And I'm coming back today feeling a new sense of optimism and hope that these results are really going to help us sharpen and learn from them and sort of see really what it is that voters want. I think what we can take away from the results is not that voters are looking for tough on crime. That's usually not top of the ballot, top of the issue for voters. What voters want is to be able to afford to live in California. They want to have a better cost of living and they want better jobs. When people are feeling frustrated and unstable because of those things, and when there's massive misinformation to the tune of millions on Prop 36 and billions if we're talking about the national election results, it's really ripe for exploitation and some of the results that we've seen, but it does not mean that criminal justice reform is dead. We are fighting, we are supporting our community members, and we are continuing the fight and learning from these difficult results.
Thank you, Claire. So the audience, I just want you to remember that because I'm going to circle back to this. Cost of living. Remember, I'm going to circle back to cost of living and wages. Like those are two things that we're just going to sit over here on the shelf just for a minute. But Christine, why do you think the issue of public safety connected so much with voters?
I think the biggest thing we can point to is the pandemic. And we did during the pandemic see some increases in crime. And we certainly saw massive shifts in how the quality of our lives across the board, right? We were held in our houses. Many downtown areas were drastically impacted by the lack of on-site workforce. There was an increase in visible drug use. There was a momentary increase in homicides around the nation. And I think we were all living in a very precarious, fear-based moment because we had never in our generation experienced anything quite like what we went through. And so the experience of that and the economic impacts that the pandemic brought to us, we're just now starting to come out of, right? The problem is that voter sentiment and community sentiment often lags behind what the data is showing us. And we saw that with this election, right? So a lot of what people were reacting to was the realities they had experienced for the last several years, instead of the moment we're in now, where crime is decreasing again, back to pre-pandemic levels, where we're seeing reductions in the overdose deaths around the state. We're seeing the subsistence around the kind of retail theft that was capturing everyone's attention over the last couple of years. And so those things are starting to wane, but the sentiment has not yet subsided. And that's what we saw in the election. And I think across the nation, what we saw was a pandemic vote for change. And no matter who was in office during the pandemic, they very, by large measures, lost their elections, all the way from the presidential election down to the races that we're speaking about, because the challenges we had as communities were real and they were difficult, and people are looking to move out of that, and they feel like perhaps by changing the elected leader, I'll get the relief that I'm looking for. Of course, those of us on this call know that as it related to the prosecutors that we're speaking about and the ballot measures we're talking about, sadly, that won't bring the change and relief that people are looking for, but I believe that's what was animating those votes.
I want to touch also, like you mentioned it too, the pandemic. I think so quickly we've forgotten how difficult things were during the pandemic. There was a rise in the use of drugs, a rise in the use of alcohol, domestic violence, therapy. You couldn't, it was almost impossible to find a therapist during the pandemic because we were in such an abnormal state. All of these things were all happening at the same time, not just in California, but across the country. And now that we're going back to normalcy, all of these things are subsiding.
Yeah.
And as you said, I think like, if we think about, it was really bad. I think we don't want to think about the triage treatment that was given to people with some difficult injuries in hospital parking lots because the hospitals were full.
Right.
And the freezers that were used for people that had passed away from COVID, like there was so much that was going on. And now we're back into this normalcy. We seem to forget these things happen and they affected us as human beings. And we're social creatures. Like we want to be able to go out. We want to be able to go shop and do all these different things. And at that time, we were just locked down and shut down. And how did it affect us, not just in California, but across the country? So I would really want our viewers to think about that when we're thinking about as we're transitioning back into normalcy.
You know, and Sam, the thing I want to say is like, I hope that we're all really careful about noticing when crime trends started to change so that we don't inappropriately credit Prop 36 passing or changes in DA's office as having impacted crime moving forward, because we're already on the decline in those experiences, right? Drug use is going down, violent crime is down, and Alameda County crime is down. Homicides are down 30% under DA Price. So I urge us all as community members and voters to pay very close attention to when those downward trends started and not misappropriately credit regressive policies for them.
I agree with you 100%, Christina. Literally, I was just listening to a news report where all of these crime trends are down and nothing has changed in terms of laws. They have been voted in, but nothing has changed, which means these downward trends were already happening before these laws were voted in.
Under the approaches that we're all advancing and under the leaders that are working with us on those. Yeah.
Exactly. Claire, why do you think the Prop 36 campaign was so successful with voters?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of what you were just talking about in terms of access to treatment. I think during the pandemic, many people lost access to the services they were relying on. People got cut off from their effective drug treatment, their mental health therapy. And voters, if you ask them, if you talk to them face to face, whether it's through polling that we've conducted at Vera Action or some of the door-to-door conversations our partners at Million Voters Project had with voters around Prop 36, time and time again, people want services. They know that what will bring our communities safety is having effective drug treatment available to everybody who needs it. The problem with Prop 36 was that it was a misinformation campaign. The Yes on 36 side promised treatment. Their tagline was that Prop 36 would bring mass treatment. And they had $17 million, which was more than double what the No campaign had, behind that misinformation. And so the fact that it resonated with voters, that treatment is a good thing, is what the electeds and what our community members should take out of this vote. They should not take away that people want tough on crime. That's not what our polling shows. And that's not, in fact, how the Yes on 36 side marketed this thing. Unfortunately, their misinformation worked. Voters voted for what they thought was services and treatment. And unfortunately, they're not going to get that from Prop 36. I think there's many things that the Board of Supervisors here in LA, for example, and the legislators in Sacramento can do to provide voters those treatments and services that they're voting for and that they really want, since Prop 36 is absolutely, unfortunately, not going to do that. But I think the reason it passed was this misinformation campaign matching voters' desire for services and the massive money behind the Yes on 36 side, which was coming from billionaires, corporate interests, and special interests.
I have to echo exactly what you said. Prop 36 was billed as mass treatment. So many more people would get treatment. But here was the piece I think we may have missed as voters. Where's the money for that treatment going to come from, which was not included? And so in order to provide mass treatment or to increase the level of treatment, that's going to cost money. And there was no money attached to Proposition 36. Let me ask you this. Why did they take that approach, and how did it contribute to the success? Like the piece, understand that I think it's 22 counties in California do not have treatment beds. And yet Prop 36 said they would increase treatment. Why do you think it was so successful? Why that piece that our voters miss? How do we miss that?
They're looking at the same polling, the same information that we are, which shows that voters don't actually want harsher penalties. Voters are not looking to throw away the key. And you notice that that's not really the part of Prop 36 that they emphasized in their marketing. What they emphasized was this mass treatment, which was, as it turns out, a lie, as you're pointing out. But that's what they emphasized because they knew it was popular with voters. And they know that voters, because of some of these post-pandemic effects that we've been talking about, and honestly, because of the introduction of fentanyl into the marketplace, the widespread introduction of fentanyl that's really ravaging our communities and the lack of treatment, people do feel like they want some treatment, they want some effective approaches. And so that's the approach that the Yes on 36 side took. I think they were looking at the polling, looking at the conversations that we're looking at, and they just misled us all.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Christine, now that Prop 36 is passed, what impact will it have on both the local and state level, do you think?
Well, that will depend in large measure to how active we are in holding the line on this work. We are going to be the difference makers here. There are counties around this state that advocated for this. Most of the DAs around this state, separate from the ones we work with, advocated for this and are excited to have this as a tool. And back to what Claire said, you know, what I think is interesting here is they have been trying to unravel this. They traditional kind of regressive prosecutors and police unions have been trying to unravel this since it passed in 2014. So for the last 10 years, they have made various attempts to unravel Prop 47. And they failed at all of them because they spoke about them as punitive measures, about ways to increase punishment. They only succeeded when they wrapped their poison pill in baloney and told us it was about treatment. That's when it passed. Because what it actually is a 3 strikes you're out at the lower level, right? We had 3 strikes you're out for serious felony conduct. We now have it for low level conduct. And so we should be really clear about that. And I hope that the work we will all do as organizations, all of us here and many others, you know, that are leaning in on this work, that we will hold county level decision making to account for this. because it is still discretionary. They are not required to do this on cases. They're not required to make the third case a felony. They're not required to request state prison. And so it is going to be the work of activists and advocates around this state, ensuring that the money in the county is available for treatment and ensuring that the criminal justice decision makers continue to have a humane response to people that are struggling with issues of drug use, poverty, or mental health.
I want to echo exactly what Christine said and narrow in and focus in a little bit on LA here, because I actually think that there's some hope for optimism in LA already. So the LA County Board of Supervisors voted to oppose Prop 36. They were one of the few counties, few cities that took that bold, brave choice because they looked at the data. They saw what was going to happen in our jails, overcrowding and the lack of access to treatment that we know we need. So the county officially did not want this. Now they have it. And how are they reacting? They are already trying to find funding for the programs and services that we need as a result of Prop 36 passing. There's a motion tomorrow that the board is hearing that would provide funding, federal funding for community health workers to make sure that these community health workers can not only provide the types of services, drug treatment, mental health therapy, housing services that we know our community members need to thrive, but they're also going to be good jobs and they're going to employ people and sort of help address that economic instability and economic feeling that everybody has. LA is taking a great step tomorrow, and I hope many other counties follow suit, and I hope that we can all work together to figure out how to pass similar policies at the state level.
Thank you, Claire. Totally agree. I want to go back. Remember a little while ago we put cost of living on the shelf, and we just touched on poverty. So I think, and this is up to the voters, but I think one of the things we've had, four war on drugs, dating all the way back to the 1930s. How come we've never had a true war on poverty? And when I say a war on poverty, what I mean by that is helping people get into great careers where they can be self-sufficient, decreasing the cost of living in places like the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, like houses. You almost cannot even buy a house now in South Central Los Angeles, where my mother still owns her house. Houses are going for $1 million plus, 800,000 to $1 million plus. And how do you buy a house? And wages, I believe minimum wage, the proposition for minimum wage was to increase minimum wage was defeated. And we're talking about a place where the cost of living continues to go up and up and up and up. And we're talking about people that are unhoused. We're talking about poverty, but we're not addressing the solutions. Like the solution should be careers, education, opportunities for people to be able to actually increase how much they're earning, and long-term careers where once they reach a certain age, they're able to retire. So just want the voters and the people that are listening, these are things that are not being addressed. Instead, we want to say, okay, you're addicted to drugs, you're unhoused, so we're going to criminalize you. At least that's what it seems to be happening right now. Christine, so that's why I set that on the shelf, and I want the voters to just think about those things in the next coming voter cycles. Christine, can you tell me what is a progressive prosecutor, and what happened with the progressive prosecutors in 2024 in our California elections?
Well, what's been happening in California since we had the introduction of prosecutors who said, I'm willing to slow down and take a closer look at how this whole system operates and be more focused on solving problems instead of just chest thumping that I'm the toughest man or woman in the room. Once prosecutors like that came on the scene, there was a concerted effort to undermine them. And people are suggesting this is a policy debate. Please don't be tricked by that. This is politics. It is purely politics. When Chesa Boudin won in San Francisco, a recall attempt was started within the same year he was elected. When DA Gascon was elected in Los Angeles, the day after he was elected, opponents pulled papers to start a recall and were told they were starting too early. They ran 2 recall attempts against him before he was ultimately on the ballot for re-election. When DA Pam Price won in Alameda County, the same thing. Within 3 months of her taking office, opponents pulled papers to start a recall. What people are looking for here is to undo the will of the voters. When voters in a jurisdiction, and when you look at what those are, San Francisco, Alameda, Los Angeles, so communities of color, People in urban settings are saying, we don't like the current criminal justice system. It is harsh, ineffective, and does not make us safer. When those voters speak loudly to that, opposition forces, police unions, traditional prosecutors, business interests rally together to try and undo the will of the voters. We need to think very seriously about that. I know in California, we think our democracy is intact because we're in a blue state with blue cities. Please don't be tricked by that. In 27 states around this country, there are efforts by conservatives to remove, limit, and oust prosecutors that are asking the questions we put them in office to ask, that are developing the programs we put them there to implement, that are saying, we want you to solve problems, not just crush down on people. And when we see individuals struggling, and we see a whole community of people struggling, we want you to solve that problem, not make it worse. And that's what our current criminal justice system does. Voters know that. They don't support the way we currently do things. But what has happened is that these interests have raised millions of dollars and made one individual responsible for their failures. Let me give you an example. Alameda County. They focused on DA Price, said crime is going up. She's not holding people accountable. DA Price actually filed more cases in her jurisdiction than her conservative predecessor. She filed cases at 65% of what the police brought her. Do you know how many cases the police solved?
How many?
3%. 3% of violent crime, not like petty theft, shoplifting, drug use, violent crime where somebody was hurt. They solved 3% of those cases, and they're blaming DA Price for crime in their community. We got to be really clear-eyed right now, people, and look at where the problems actually are. If police don't arrest anybody and it's everything goes on the street, we know it gets out of control. And so if you want to hold somebody accountable for that, it is policing in this country. It is not the prosecutors who are much further down the line. And increasing punishments does nothing if nobody ever gets caught. We've been screaming this from every microphone we get a chance to be in front of. I'm not saying we should arrest everybody or have that response to every issue. But when there is violence and there is no intervention from a system saying, hey, you've crossed a line, we need to get your attention and slow this down, yes, things get out of control. And so we need to not take the bait that this is one prosecutor in one place, where the systems that have failed community for decades, as you were just saying, Sam, since the 1930s, we have been trying this approach, almost 100 years into this experiment that has failed. And people are threatened by the few courageous leaders willing to stand up and say, we can do better than failing 60% of the time.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to ask you, thank you, Christine, but I want to ask you one thing. What challenges did George Gascon face in communicating his message about public safety to voters in LA County? And are there ways to work with incoming DA Nathan Hochman?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge DA Gascon and all of the progressives had is there is a media bias against them. And it is interesting to report on controversy and conflict, right? And so when a new DA comes in and says, I want to change the way we're thinking about these problems, and hits resistance within their office, that's interesting to media. And then when those same people start leaking police reports and talking about tragic outcomes in the community, that's conflict where they can blame a politician, and that's interesting to media. And then when that same elected leader, when DA Gascon says, hey, I want to report on a really great outcome we had, somebody that we resentenced and came home and is thriving in their community, that does not get reported on. And so all that the voters and the residents of an area are exposed to is the failures of the system that are being inappropriately blamed on one individual actor. And so that makes it very, very hard, right? Since DA Gascon was elected, he has basically faced 4 elections, right? He was elected, he had a first recall, he had a second recall, he had a primary, and then he ultimately had his election just in this November. To be in a constant campaign mode where the earned media is piling up against you is very hard to keep your reputation intact. This is somebody that when you talk about it now, people do not realize spent 30 years as a police officer in Los Angeles, has more commitment to public safety in the community than anybody, particularly Nathan Hochman, who grew up in Beverly Hills and did private tax defense work, helping make sure that wealthy people didn't pay their fair share of taxes. So if we want to talk about who actually cares about your public safety and has their eye on the ball, it was DA Gascon. But that is not how he was portrayed in the media, and that created immediate challenges that were very hard to overcome. All that said, my hope is that all of us here and others can reach the new district attorney and encourage him to work with all of us. He did profess to have some values that are aligned with us. And so we are eager to meet him, to reach out to him and have that conversation and see where that alignment can exist and where we can grow the opportunities there, because he is now the elected leader and we're going to hold him to those promises that he made.
Thank you, Christine. Claire, I want to go to some questions that some of our viewers are asking. So I want you both to answer this. So first question, I hear treatment for Prop 36 isn't funded. What can we do to help this mass treatment idea work? Or should we just resist working with Prop 36 altogether? Claire?
Yeah, it's a great question. And absolutely, Prop 36 provided no funding for drug treatment. And so what that means is that absent counties and localities stepping in and providing funding for that drug treatment, people are going to go to prison and jail for their addictions, for using drugs. And that's incredibly dangerous, incredibly harmful to those people in their communities. And it's going to cause overcrowding in our already dangerously overcrowded jails, particularly here in LA. And so what we should all be working towards is supporting things like the board's efforts, the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles's efforts to get treatment and community health workers. We should particularly be excited about policies like this one, where it's not only going to provide people drug treatment, housing services, mental health care when they need it, it's also going to fund jobs so that people can afford to live in Los Angeles, afford to live in California. And we need to be pushing for that, not just here in Los Angeles, but across the state, in every single county, in every single city. We need to be pushing for it in Sacramento. And we need to hold accountable those counties that supported Prop 36 that said this will provide mass treatment when ultimately it does not. And so the solution is to listen to voters and push for these services and treatment at the local level, at the state level, and everywhere we can.
You're on mute, Sam.
You did, Sam.
I always tell my staff that's a rookie mistake.
Sorry.
Christine, would you like to weigh in on the same question? Prop 36 isn't funded. What can we do to help this mass treatment idea work, or should we just resist working with Prop 36 altogether?
Well, we don't need to work with Prop 36, and that, in my opinion, should not be the framework, right? All of us already wanted more treatment. We knew that would better solve people's issues with drugs than jail. So we don't need to change our position. We just need to recognize that what they just passed is not a solution. It's a restatement of the problem. And so our work continues, right? Nothing new is going to happen in the courts that affords more treatment than was already being afforded to people. What has changed is the possibility of a felony consequence for drug use. And so I think our focus is twofold. As it has always been, stay true to our values and try to increase services that help people step out of that cycle of addiction and despair. We, of course, want to keep doing that. And two, we need to keep track of what counties are doing. Look at what LA County does versus what San Bernardino does versus San Diego, San Francisco, and everywhere in between, and how they respond to people with these issues, because it is not limited to one county. Every county in this state has a problem around drug use, around mental health challenges, and lacks funding. And so what we need to do as advocates and people who care about the solutions is start keeping track of that data. How often are people being given a felony consequence in their county? Was their treatment available? Were they actually enrolled in that treatment? So that we can point out when there are systemic failures and avoid getting into the trap of just individual failures.
Thank you, Christine. One other question that our viewers submitted is, why did so many people vote not to end modern day slavery under Prop 6?
No.
Christine, and then Claire.
I think this was largely about funding. There just was no money in the campaign for Prop 6, and it was difficult, therefore, to help people understand it. This passed in other states. So, I think we need to probably come back around to this question with voters, with a campaign where we can actually talk to them about the dangers of having forced work conditions versus the kinds of work conditions that can be voluntary and can be therapeutic and rehabilitative. But we just did not get that chance without a campaign to effectively communicate why this was important.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Claire?
Yeah, I also don't think it can be ignored that voters in California were unhappy with a lot of things, and voters in California did not see a lot of candidates that were promising real change, real affordability, real good jobs, all of that. And there were partisan efforts to get voters out on the right in particular, not just in the federal election, but we saw, for example, on Prop 36 that the Yes on 36 side gave over $1 million to the California GOP. This was a partisan effort to drive partisan turnout and right-wing turnout. And I wonder, we didn't work on Prop 6, but I do wonder if part of the very close margins here had to do with that partisan effort. And frankly, our side not offering a lot of strong arguments that met voters where they were at in terms of economic justice, affordability, and needing to be able to live in this state. And so I wonder if some of the partisan efforts made a difference here on the margins.
I agree so much. We didn't have a chance to really educate the public of what Proposition 6 was. In my viewpoint, Alabama passed similar legislation. Alabama, let that sink in for a minute. Alabama does not want slavery in their constitution. Nevada and others. And so California, like, I think we just didn't do a great job. Like you said, there was not enough funding, and we didn't do a great job of really communicating to the public exactly what this was, because it in two different instances. On one instance, yes, it will impact people that are incarcerated, but I think just morally, as a person who doesn't believe in slavery or involuntary servitude, like, I just don't want that in my constitution. I don't believe in it. I don't think anyone should be forced to work. When people are incarcerated, I think the incarceration is the punishment. And so being removed from your family, from society. But again, being able to meet people where they're at, and being able to really communicate what it meant to take this out of our constitution as we move forward as Californians. And I think I agree with you, Christine. We need to bring this back around without a doubt. So Claire, for 2025 at the local level in Los Angeles, what are you looking forward to?
Looking forward to working with the board and hopefully with you and our other partners here in Los Angeles to make sure that we continue to fund and increase our funding for the types of programs and services that work. I think we should look really carefully at fully funding job training efforts for people coming out of jail and prison. We should be fully funding the types of things that get people good jobs and provide them the services and behavioral health care that they need to thrive in those jobs. So I'm looking forward to working hard to pass those. I'm also really think the tracking that Christine was talking about is important, especially here in Los Angeles. We know that our jail, Men's Central Jail, is dangerously overfilled already. We need to keep an eye on what impact Prop 36 has on Men's Central Jail, and we need to double down on our energy and efforts to close that jail without a replacement. I'm looking forward to working hard to redouble those efforts, given that we get to live in a place where the county has said they don't support Prop 36. They want to close Men's Central Jail without a replacement. Let's get it done this year.
Let's make it happen. Thank you. Christine, at the state level, what are you looking for in 2025?
So I think, our work will continue. I think now a lot will look to the state to help us continue to find solutions to some of the problems that we're seeing. There will obviously be efforts to think about Prop 36 in the state legislature. Unfortunately, we passed a whole series of very positive bills in the last session around Prop 36 that really eliminated the need for this ballot measure, but was not successful in pulling that off of the ballot. So I suspect that there'll be a lot of effort to think about how do we limit some of the negative impacts of Prop 36, and how do we now step in and solve the problem that they have created, that the treatment is not available at the levels that they promised voters. But the work I'm really excited about, and feel a redoubled commitment to, is continuing the work that we all do of talking to our communities about the issues around the criminal justice system. And even though people stay with us on treatment and the need to problem solve, we still have a very large cultural problem in this state and in this country of thinking that punishment is going to make people act differently. And unfortunately, it just is not proven out by the data. It's not proven out by our lived experience. And my hope is that we can deepen those conversations in our community about the fact that we actually have to love everybody for them to get better. And that love doesn't have to look soft or absurd. It can look like services. It can look like cognitive behavioral therapy. It can look like employment that leads you out of a cycle of poverty. It can look like all the things we know are the solutions. And I hope in this moment when this country is going to turn deeper and darker around fear and division, that the thing that we can work on and the example we can be is that love and unity and providing people what they need to have a thriving life is going to give us the safety we're so desperate for.
Thank you, Christine. Both Christine and Claire, would you share, as we close out, can you tell us what's next for you and where can people find your work? Claire, go first, and then Christine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned some of what's next for us on the local level in terms of what we're going to be pushing for here. I absolutely love Christine's message there around love and around making sure that voters and people in our community understand that diversion is not a get out of jail free card. Diversion is hard work. Restorative justice is hard work. It's accountability, and we all have to work together to double down on making sure that our communities are informed about that. And maybe that means getting off the editorial board page. Maybe it means more social media interviews like this. Maybe it means figuring out how to talk to people on WhatsApp and where folks are getting their information. But I'm looking forward to both pushing some of these efforts in the legislature and statewide to fund the workplace services and treatment and services that we need. And I'm looking forward to figuring out how to talk to voters where they are about what they care about, which is affordability, good jobs, and services. And we have to get that message to folks where they are.
Thank you, Claire.
Yes.
And where do we find your work at?
Vera.org. And one place I really do want to point folks to is vera.org/CareFirstLA. This is a great tool and database, to Christine's point about tracking. This is a good place to look to track where LA's jail population is, to track what we're funding and what we're not funding here in Los Angeles. And it's a great place to keep an eye out on for what Prop 36 and this DA result will mean for Los Angeles, California.
Thank you. And for all our viewers, it's right there on the screen for you. Please tap in at vera.org, Care First LA. And Christine, same question I have for you. As we close out, tell us what's next for you and where can people find your work at?
Yeah, so we're going to continue to work with prosecutors around the state, trying to encourage them to rethink the traditional approaches and find solutions that are more humane and effective at providing community well-being. We will continue to do that work with any elected prosecutor in the state that's interested in working with us, but we also work with line prosecutors and victim advocates up and down the state, providing them with training and resources about interventions that we think work better than using jails and prisons as our solution to public safety. And so that work can all be found on our prosecutorsalliance.org website. We'll continue to do that work. We welcome folks here to lean in on that work with us, to encourage your local prosecutor in whatever county you're in the state to engage with our organization to make sure they're getting support for themselves and their staff about how to rethink public safety in 2024 and beyond. And then we'll continue to be engaged in politics. We work on legislative efforts. We work on district attorney elections. We worked on the Prop 36 campaign. And that work is in our C4. And you can find that, and please lean in with us on that work, prosecutorsallianceaction.org. Thank you.
And for our viewers, that was just on our screen, prosecutoralliance.org/. Please check out the work that the amazing work that they're doing at both Vera and Prosecutors Alliance. Claire and Christine, thank you so much for joining us. Let's continue to push forward. Let's continue to do this work. Make our state, our country, and the world a better place for everyone. Thank you so much. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.